On the morning of Friday, October 9, 1998, a man named Abdullah Öcalan was passing through passport control at Damascus airport. Abdullah was traveling with a forged passport on a flight from Damascus to Stockholm, with a layover in Athens. However, he was no ordinary traveler. His true identity was Abdullah Öcalan, leader of the Kurdistan Workers' Party, the PKK. Öcalan was forced to leave Syria after the Turkish government led by President Süleyman Demirel and Prime Minister Mesut Yilmaz threatened Syria with military intervention as Syria's President Hafez al-Assad had allowed the PKK to establish camps on its territory and permitted its leader to reside in the country. 3 weeks earlier, on September 15, 1998, Turkish Land Forces Commander General Atilla Ateş visited Reyhanli, in the Hatay province, and standing near the Syrian border declared, "We have no more patience with Syria. If Turkey does not receive the response it expects, it will have the right to take all necessary measures." 2 days later, on September 17, the leaders of the two main political parties in Iraqi Kurdistan, Barzani of the Kurdish Democratic Party, and Tolabani of the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan, signed the Washington Peace Agreement following mediation efforts led by the United States Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright, bringing the two parties together on crucial issues of power sharing and revenue distribution. The agreement echoed badly in Turkey as it meant that they would face a US-supported unified Kurdish front in Iraq, in addition to Syria's continued tolerance of PKK's operations within its territory. Under these developments, Turkey demanded that Öcalan be expelled and threatened Syria with war if its demands were not met. Back in Syria, Öcalan's decision to land in Athens was deliberate, as he had established connections with various circles in Greece, including local government, the arts community, and political parties, particularly the then-ruling Pan-Hellenic Socialist movement. A key figure in these ties was Member of Parliament Kostas Barduvas, whom Öcalan invited to Damascus. Barduvas accepted the invitation and traveled to the Syrian capital on October 7. During their meeting, Öcalan explained his situation and requested that the Greek government allow him to stay in Greece temporarily until his associates in Europe arranged for him to receive political asylum in a European country. Barduvas returned to Athens, and the following day he confirmed to Öcalan's aides that the Greek government had approved Öcalan's request. On the morning of October 9, and while Öcalan was still en route to Greece, Barduvas informed the Greek Minister of Public Order that a high-ranking official was arriving in Athens for medical treatment. Understanding that this referred to Öcalan, the minister alerted the director of the National Intelligence Service, Haralambos Stavrakakis. Accompanied by experienced intelligence officer Savvas Kalenteridis, Stavrakakis went to Hellinikon International Airport in Athens to meet Öcalan. Accompanied by 2 men and a woman, Öcalan arrived at the airport, where he remained for approximately 7 hours. During this time, Öcalan and the Greek intelligence officers negotiated the conditions of his stay in Greece, while his aides communicated with PKK members in Russia who had connections within the Russian government. Just as all preparations were finalized, the Greek officers received a fax containing an official invitation for Öcalan, signed by Alexei Mitrofanov, chairman of the Committee on Geopolitics of the State Duma of the Russian Federation. Öcalan accepted the invitation and, at his request, he traveled with Kalenteridis to Moscow, on a private plane arranged by the Greek Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The plane landed at Sheremetyevo International Airport, where Öcalan was received with a semi-official ceremony. Kalenteridis returned to Greece on the same plane. Öcalan was sheltered in the house of Vladimir Zhirinovsky, leader of the Liberal Democratic Party, and soon after he requested political asylum in Russia. In the 3rd week after his arrival, Öcalan participated in a live Kurdish television program via a phone call. Following his participation, Russian security personnel informed him that intelligence agencies from Israel, Turkey, and the United States had precisely tracked his location using the phone's satellite signal. On November 4, the Duma unanimously supported the appeal to the president to grant asylum to Öcalan, with 298 deputies in favor and only 1 opposed. However, Prime Minister Yevgeny Primakov, who had recently taken office in September, did not act on the motion. Instead, Öcalan was given 9 days to leave Russia. After staying 33 days in Russia, Öcalan left for Italy on November 12. Once in Rome, Öcalan surrendered to the Italian police and applied for political asylum. He was held under house arrest in Infernetto, a suburban zone of Rome. The newly installed government of Massimo D'Alema faced a legal dilemma. While Italy opposed the death penalty and could not extradite Öcalan to Turkey, granting him asylum was highly contentious. Meanwhile, Turkey insisted on his extradition and threatened economic repercussions, while NATO allies sought to maintain good relations with Ankara. To avoid escalating tensions, the Italian government subtly pressured Öcalan to leave, with D'Alema declaring on December 23 that the best solution would be for Öcalan to leave Italy voluntarily. Earlier, the minister of the Greek presidency under the Simitis government, Alekos Papadopoulos, warned Öcalan through Pantheon University professor Christoforos Yalleridis not to leave Italy under any circumstances. Based on CIA information, he believed that any plane departing from Rome would ultimately end up in Ankara. D'Alema made an agreement with Russian Prime Minister Yevgeny Primakov to transport Öcalan by private plane to a Russian military base and then on to South Africa. South African President, Thabo Mbeki, had also been consulted and was willing to receive him. Removing Öcalan from the villa where he was staying in Rome required careful planning. A lookalike was placed in his residence, and on January 16, 1999, Öcalan disguised himself as a police officer and left during a scheduled guard change, managing to slip away unnoticed. After arriving in Moscow, Öcalan was secretly transferred to a military base in Dushanbe, Tajikistan, where he was sheltered while U.S. Secretary of State Madeleine Albright was in Moscow. His case was among the topics discussed during her two-day visit from January 23 to 25. After Albright's departure, Öcalan was transferred to St. Petersburg in Russia and was warned to remain on his plane due to alleged threats of kidnapping or assassination by hired criminals. Öcalan remained on his plane without heating or any means of communication until Antonis Naxakis, a retired Greek naval officer, arranged a private Learjet and flew him back to Athens for the second time on January 29. While Öcalan was being transported, Russia ordered the plane to land in Bucharest, as Romania had reportedly agreed to hand him over to the Turkish authorities. The plane refused and landed in Athens. The director of the National Intelligence Service, Stavrakakis, met with him and informed him that he could not remain in Greece. Öcalan, his companions and Greek intelligence officers started working on other alternatives. Öcalan was offered the option to go to Libya, which he found favorable. However, when he requested to go to Beirut, Lebanon, officials explained that Greece could not ensure his safe passage there. Another plan involved dispatching several yachts in different directions, with one carrying Öcalan. By taking the vessel outside the 12-mile limit, he would be beyond Greece's jurisdiction. Using a foreign-flagged ship, he could have stayed at sea for up to a month, effectively evading any intervention. Eventually, the Kurdish movement arranged for Öcalan to be sent to the Netherlands. He requested that an official from Greece accompany him, and Kalenteridis was chosen due to his knowledge of Turkish and his previous experience traveling with Öcalan. The plan was for them to fly to Minsk in Belarus, where Öcalan would board a cargo plane from Riga, Latvia, bound for Rotterdam. On January 30, Öcalan landed at Minsk airport. On the plane were Öcalan, the Greek agent Kalenteridis, Denise Melser and a Dutch lawyer named Rota Minsk. However, the cargo plane they were expecting had not been given permission to land, and Dutch authorities had issued an airspace closure order. After waiting in Minsk in sub-zero temperatures, Öcalan returned to Athens, landing 3:30 in the morning of February 1. 2 hours later, he boarded a flight to the Greek island of Corfu, in the Ionian Sea. Upon Öcalan's arrival in Corfu, news of his presence on the island quickly spread. Kalenteridis proposed that Öcalan would take a speedboat to a remote Italian shore, where he would stay in a trailer caravan, allowing for mobility as needed. However, the plan was leaked shortly after being discussed, prompting the Italian Coast Guard to issue notices, a clear indication that communications within the Greek intelligence agency had been compromised. As Greek authorities became aware that key actors were closely monitoring their operations, Greek officials proposed that Öcalan travel to an African country. Initially hesitant, Öcalan was persuaded by Kalenteridis who, as instructed by Stavrakakis, assured him that the Greek state guaranteed his safety. With this reassurance, Öcalan agreed to board the flight. Meanwhile, authorities ordered a blackout at the airport to conceal the operation. However, during the process, the car transporting Öcalan accidentally crashed into the wing of the jet he was meant to board, causing minor injuries to some of the vehicle's passengers. After the accident, Öcalan boarded a Greek Coast Guard boat to Igoumenitsa, then traveled by car to the Araxos air base in northwestern Peloponnese. From there, Öcalan, his bodyguard Ibrahim Ayaz, interpreter Denise Melsa, Greek businessman Aristos Aristidou, and Greek agent Kalenteridis departed for Kenya at 5:30 in the morning of February 2. For security reasons, Kalenteridis was unaware that the plane was heading to Nairobi. His orders were to escort Öcalan to an African country and then return to Greece on the same aircraft. He found out about the destination after the plane had left Araxos. On February 2, 1999, at 11 a.m., the Falcon 900 carrying Öcalan landed at Jomo Kenyatta International Airport in Nairobi, Kenya. Öcalan was traveling with a fake passport issued by the Republic of Cyprus in the name of Lazarus Mavros. With him were the Greek intelligence officer Savvas Kalenteridis, Melsa Denise, traveling with a German identity card issued in the name of Barivan Gunga and with date of birth December 3, 1981, Ayaz Ibrahim, holder of Swedish passport with date of birth January 1, 1959, Aristos Aristidou, holder of Cypriot passport with date of birth June 10, 1949. All passengers entered Kenya legally with a visa stamp in their passport and a completed entry card. Greek ambassador to Kenya, Giorgos Costoulas, was expecting a high-ranking Serbian official, as informed by the embassy secretary. Instead, he was met by Greek intelligence officer Savvas Kalenteridis, who then introduced him to Öcalan. The PKK's leader was then transferred to the ambassador's residence. On February 3, Kalenteridis reported to his superiors and received a directive from the director of the diplomatic office in Athens that further communication with the foreign minister's office will only be done verbally, that is, by telephone. Despite this instruction, he and the ambassador decided to document in detail on paper all orders from Athens and events in Nairobi. Kalenteridis was ordered to leave immediately for South Africa, where he would negotiate asylum and secure a passport for Öcalan. At the same time, Mr. Aristidou was instructed to depart as soon as possible, as his mission had officially ended, though a return to Kenya wasn't out of the question. Their departure was scheduled for the very next day. Meanwhile, Öcalan's close associates were preparing to arrive in Kenya in the coming days, tasked with ensuring his security. On February 4, Ambassador Costoulas was summoned to the Kenyan Foreign Ministry, where he was questioned about the passengers on the Falcon. The ambassador stated that he couldn't provide any details regarding the passengers, as the embassy's secretary had handled their arrangements. Nairobi was initially intended as a temporary stop, lasting no more than 3 days, with Öcalan's final destination planned for South Africa. For that reason, Kalenteridis was instructed to travel to Johannesburg and meet George Bezos, a Greek South African human rights lawyer famous for defending Nelson Mandela during the Rivonia trial, in order to persuade Mandela to grant Öcalan asylum. However, Kenyan airport authorities prevented him from traveling. Meanwhile, Athens instructed the ambassador to deny any knowledge of Öcalan's presence in Kenya whenever questioned by Kenyan authorities. In the morning of February 5, the General Secretary of the Foreign Ministry in Kenya, Kathurima, asked Ambassador Costoulas for an update on the Falcons passengers. The ambassador responded that he did not know the whereabouts of 3 of them, but was aware that one had departed and another had been detained by airport authorities without cause and remained in Nairobi. Kathurima demanded to see the passport of Kalenteridis and agreed with the ambassador to meet the upcoming Monday for that purpose. At 1400 hours, the director of the Greek Foreign Minister's diplomatic office communicated with the embassy and reiterated that Öcalan must be removed from the embassy. His words were, "We did a favor. They shouldn't make us regret it. Let him go on a safari, let him go wherever he wants, just away from national symbols." Seeking an alternative plan, a proposal was made to Athens for Öcalan to be moved to UN premises in Nairobi, where he would surrender and seek asylum. However, Athens rejected the idea and instead instructed the embassy to ensure Öcalan's immediate removal from any association with national symbols. The ambassador and Kalenteridis informed Öcalan of the decision to remove him from the residence. Öcalan, sensing danger, requested political asylum from Greece, submitting a handwritten asylum application in Turkish. The ambassador explained that the Greek government had decided not to grant him asylum for serious reasons and that he was in Kenya by his own consent. Öcalan replied, "Yes, I had agreed to be moved from the embassy residence in Athens, but as of today, I am certain that any step outside of this space, without an official guarantee from any country, will result in my physical destruction. Please request protection from Greece and the local authorities. If asylum is denied, it should be communicated to us through the official and institutional procedures of the Greek authorities. I also ask Greece to take necessary measures for my security and request that the local authorities provide regional security for the residents." Following yet another request from Athens for Öcalan to leave the Greek premises, 2 of his associates pleaded with the authorities not to pressure their leader. They even went so far as to threaten self-immolation in the garden of the residence as a form of protest. On February 6, Ambassador Costoulas proposed to the Greek Minister of Foreign Affairs that the Seychelles be considered as a potential escape destination for Öcalan. To facilitate the plan, a Greek businessman was entrusted with handling the negotiations. Late in the evening, one of Öcalan's associates was informed by a European source that 2 of his associates were already on their way to Nairobi. On February 7, Kalenteridis set out to find Öcalan's associates, but despite his efforts, he was unable to locate them. As the hours passed, he received word that these associates, holding Greek refugee passports, had been denied entry into Kenya. Once again, Athens made a formal request for Öcalan to be removed from any premises linked to Greece. On February 8, the embassy's secretary went to the Kenyan Ministry of Foreign Affairs around 3 p.m. to meet with the Secretary-General, Mr. Kathurima. Once in the office, the Greek embassy's secretary met the head of the protocol service and another individual, whose identity remains unknown, most likely a police or security officer or someone from the presidential entourage. As they sat down, the individuals began questioning the secretary. "Where are the ones who arrived? I don't know where 3 of them are, one left, one is here, and this is his passport. What type of aircraft was it? I don't know much about airplanes. Who granted permission for the overflight and landing? Permission was requested through a verbal note. I don't know what happened next with the relevant authorities, air traffic control, or other." The protocol director insisted, permission should have been granted in writing. "Was a written permit given to us?" "No." "How did the passengers leave the airport?" "Just like any other passenger." "Did these people have a designated mission from the Greek government to inspect embassy premises? Did they come to the embassy?" "No, these people have absolutely no connection to the Greek government, and they didn't come to the embassy for any work, except for Kalenteridis, who is complaining about being detained at Nairobi airport without cause." "Is this passport fake?" "No. There is another Greek passport within Kenya with the same details and the same number. This passport is not fake, and I am surprised by the existence of a fake passport with the same number. Investigations are underway regarding the fake passport issue." "Who received the passengers from the aircraft?" "I did." "Was the ambassador at the airport?" Yes, but he was not there to receive them. February 9 went by with no major developments. Öcalan remained at the residence, where he received daily updates from Kalenteridis, who provided him with articles from the Turkish press. Among the news, a Hurriyet article stated that Öcalan was expected to be arrested in the coming days. Additionally, as she had been doing since February 2 and every other day, Öcalan's associate, Melsa Deniz, visited the embassy to make phone calls and reassure high-ranking PKK members in Europe that Öcalan was safe and well. These communications were strictly conducted in Greek and were closely monitored by Kalenteridis. On February 10, a response was received from the Seychelles, with the island nation demanding a sum of $15 million in exchange for accepting the Kurdish leader. The ambassador and his associates began working on scenarios for Öcalan's safe departure to the Seychelles. Among other ideas, they considered transferring him to a farm and having him leave Kenya for Somalia or Tanzania in a small twin-engine plane, which would depart from one of the many dirt airstrips in Kenya. However, the discussion did not lead to a conclusion due to a lack of communication with the Greek Ministry of Foreign Affairs and uncertainty regarding developments in Athens. At 1730, a man claiming to be Nikos Merakis, a journalist from the newspaper Tevima, called the embassy. He mentioned that it had come to his knowledge that Öcalan was in Kenya and asked to be informed whether this was true. However, the man had a foreign accent, and the embassy staff grew suspicious of his claim. They denied it and promptly ended the phone call. Late in the evening, two of Öcalan's associates arrived at the embassy. They were briefed on the situation and immediately requested to see Öcalan. PKK's leader was briefed on the plan to go to the Seychelles, which he accepted. On February 11, at 10 in the morning, another journalist called the embassy requesting to know if Öcalan was present at the embassy. Embassy staff denied the claim and ended the call. In yet another request for Öcalan to leave the ambassador's residence, he stated that he would only leave if the necessary guarantees were provided, otherwise, it would be extremely dangerous. At 8 o'clock in the evening, a meeting took place at the embassy. The possibility of Öcalan leaving by road to Tanzania with 2 cars was being considered. The plan proposed departure at 4 o'clock the following day, with the crossing of the border around 6 o'clock. The Greek foreign minister reluctantly accepted the plan. However, Öcalan requested concrete and documented security guarantees. On February 12, at around 10 in the morning, Kalenteridis contacted the director of the Greek intelligence service Stavrakakis who, referring to Öcalan, furiously stated, "Tell him he's an idiot. He committed an atrocity. What he did means nothing. It's not valid. Tell him to get the hell out of here quickly and go wherever he wants. We didn't promise him anything. Throw him out, Savvas, let's get this over with. Please, my child." Later that day, Stavrakakis requested the urgent relocation of Öcalan to the Orthodox Church in Nairobi. Kalenteridis and the ambassador went to assess the location of the church. Upon noticing the presence of plainclothes police officers, they quickly returned to the embassy. Later that night, in another attempt to convince Öcalan to leave for the Seychelles, responded that he would only leave the residence if he had a genuine Seychelles passport and would travel to that country via a third country, which he left to the discretion of the embassy. Meanwhile, the ambassador was in contact with a businessman who was willing to arrange vehicles to safely transport Öcalan to a remote location away from Nairobi. From there, a private jet would be provided for his escape from Kenya. Athens approved the plan and urged for swift arrangements. On February 13, the plan to relocate Öcalan to Seychelles was halted as the required official travel documents for PKK's leader were still not delivered. From Athens, Stavrakakis angrily instructed Kalenteridis to forcefully remove Öcalan from the ambassador's residence. Kalenteridis refused the order, stating that it was unacceptable to be asked to use force against Öcalan. In a further escalation, Athens sent a message relaying that 4 Greek intelligence officers from Cairo were on their way to Nairobi, with the mission to evict Öcalan from the residence, if necessary, using force. As tension mounted in the residence, Öcalan's associates once again threatened to self-immolate. One of them later pulled out a firearm and threatened to commit suicide if the pressure on Öcalan continued and their demands were not met. That night, as the 4 Greek officers from Cairo were expected to arrive, the embassy building was evacuated, as everyone braced for what was to come. The 4-member intelligence team dispatched by Athens arrived at the embassy near midday on Sunday, February 14. Codenamed the football team, the unit was under strict orders to remove Öcalan from the embassy immediately and relocate him to a nearby hotel room. The directive was clear: everything had to be concluded by the following day. The 4 officers from the security division of the Greek National Intelligence Service were team leader Ioannis Bobos, Athanasios Spanias, Ioannis Ioannidis, and Stathis, whose surname was not reported. Upon the team's arrival, the team leader, Bobos, reported being under constant close-range surveillance by heavily armed Kenyan and American operatives. Following the team's request for an update on the security situation at the ambassador's residence and the embassy, Kalenteridis informed them that the Kurds were armed, but the exact type of weapons they possessed was unknown. He also reported that they were in possession of a suspicious small Samsonite-type suitcase, which was possibly hiding an explosive device and was extremely heavy. Given these circumstances on the ground, the team's leader decided to abort the operation and declared that he would leave Kenya as soon as possible, regardless of the orders issued by Athens. The team decided to depart the next morning at 7:30, flying with Egypt Air to Athens via Cairo. Among Öcalan's escorts, the atmosphere was a mix of uneasy calm and underlying anxiety about what lay ahead. Later in the evening, Öcalan turned to the ambassador and Kalenteridis and remarked, "I feel as though this chapter of the story has come to an end." On the early morning of February 15, Costoulas was urgently summoned to the Kenyan Foreign Ministry, where he was presented photographic evidence confirming that the Kenyan authorities were aware of Öcalan's presence at the diplomatic compound. He was also informed that Kenyan police had arrested the Greek team sent from Cairo to Nairobi. Kathurima informed the ambassador that the Kenyan authorities had been aware of Öcalan's presence at the Greek ambassador's residence since his arrival. They were prepared to cooperate with the Greek side to ensure his swift departure from the country and prevent any further damage to Kenya. The authorities offered an aircraft for Öcalan's quick exit to any country he chose, but with one crucial condition: the Greek side must maintain strict confidentiality to ensure that it would never be known that Öcalan had ever set foot in Kenya. The ambassador communicated with Athens, which accepted the Kenyan proposals. Kathurima presented the ambassador with a deadline and requested that Öcalan leave Kenyan soil by 1730. At 1530, the ambassador returned to the embassy and, joined by Kalenteridis, rushed to the ambassador's residence, where they informed Öcalan's with Kenyan authorities' willingness to cooperate to ensure his safe departure from Kenya to any destination of his choosing. The ambassador warned Öcalan that the Kenyan authorities would no longer be able to guarantee his safety at the compound once the deadline had passed. Realizing that the escalating situation posed a potentially deadly risk to everyone at the residence, Öcalan reluctantly accepted, stating that he did not want to create problems for his friends. At 6 o'clock, a Kenya security official arrived at the residence to discuss the details of Öcalan's exit and transfer to the airport, urging him not to delay any further, as any new delay would be at the expense of Öcalan's life, since night was falling. Outside the residence, 5 Kenyan vehicles were waiting to transport Öcalan to the airport. Despite the ambassador's request to have Öcalan transported in a Greek diplomatic vehicle, the Kenyan officers firmly denied this request. Öcalan sat in the back seat of a blue Toyota Land Cruiser, while Kenyan authorities refused to allow any members of the Greek mission to board the same vehicle. As the vehicles departed for the airport, the 3 vehicles at the front of the convoy escorting Öcalan drove off, while the car carrying the ambassador and Kalenteridis stayed a bit behind. The convoy then took a different route to the airport, citing security reasons and the need for speed. At the airport, the 3 vehicles, one of which was carrying Öcalan, entered the area through a road typically reserved for security vehicles. The remaining 2 vehicles arrived at the airport several minutes later. Öcalan boarded the private jet, believing he was being transferred to a neutral country, but instead, he was met by Turkish intelligence officers who immediately subdued him. He was then transferred to Turkey, where, as of April 15, 2025, he remains in solitary confinement as the sole prisoner on Imrali Island in the Sea of Marmara.